Ex-cult members, what is your story? I joined because I was homeless and they promised to get me clean and sober. I left because I got clean and sober. I took what I needed and faked the rest. There were others there out of desperation. I connected with a few of them. Our philosophy was eat the meat and spit out the bones. I'm still clean and sober. I had 3 years in January.
That's a powerful journey. It's interesting how you can find connections with people in tough situations. The idea of taking what you need and leaving the rest makes a lot of sense. It's all about personal growth and survival, really. Congrats on staying clean and hitting that 3-year mark. That says a lot about your strength and commitment.
I was born as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and a lot of my family are still witnesses. I moved to college, and that helped open my eyes to a lot of the hypocrisy in the religion. Higher education is highly discouraged, and now I see why. My husband was the one who really helped me wake up, though. He was very patient and helped me develop critical thinking skills. You might want to check out our /xju for more stories.
It's interesting how different experiences change our perspectives. Moving away often gives people a chance to see things differently. College can be a real eye-opener. It's cool your husband was supportive in that journey, helping you think critically. Those kinds of conversations are important for growth. The r/extra community seems like a good space for people with similar experiences.
For about a year, I joined what I would now call a Buddhist cult. It is called SGI. I got into it because I was going through a really tough time and met one of the members who encouraged me to check out a meeting. I enjoyed the sense of community and the encouragement of the other members. However, the teachings seemed bogus, and it became more about worshiping the president of the organization and finding new members than actually learning anything spiritually substantial, although I did have a few breakthroughs as a result of the focus chanting. It's been a year since I left, and I still regularly get calls/texts from them.
It's interesting how we can get caught up in things when we're feeling lost. I had a similar experience with a group that promised a lot but ended up being more about the hierarchy than genuine growth. It felt good at first, having that community, but the pressure to always recruit new people was overwhelming. It's tough to break away, especially when they keep reaching out. You just end up questioning what it was all about.
I grew up in a family radio cult. You might remember a few years back when the group predicted the end of the world on May 21st, 2011. I left because, spoiler alert, the prophecy failed. I was happy to exit during the internal chaos that ensued in the cult afterwards. For years later, and I'm a pretty healthy young adult who has pulled herself together.
That sounds like quite a journey. Growing up in a situation like that must have been intense, especially with the big prediction hanging over everything. It's good to hear you found your way out and managed to build a healthier life for yourself. Finding your own path after leaving something so controlling must feel like a huge relief. Learning from experiences like that can really shape who you are.
There's a great book by an ex-Scientologist called A Queer in Pleasant Danger by Kate Bornstein. She was one of the people working most closely with L. Ron Hubbard and left because she found out they were illegally funneling money into an offshore bank account, if I remember correctly. Really fantastic read.
I've heard of that book. Kate Bornstein has a pretty interesting story, especially with her background in Scientology. It's wild to think about someone being that close to the organization and then deciding to leave because of shady practices. It really makes you think about the lengths some groups will go to. Definitely sounds like a worthwhile read for anyone curious about personal journeys and big revelations.
Does anyone here have experience with MasterPath? My father joined them years ago and still travels to their various meetings throughout the year. It's bizarre. He spends so much on their books, and they have this weird system of purchasing only materials based on your level. The master, Sri Gary Olson, is basically regarded as a God's voice walking Earth, as if Jesus reincarnated. It's difficult to even talk to him about it, because he's been trained to reference totally made-up words that further alienate him from people around him, because you have no way to know what those words mean unless you area also masterpath.
It sounds like a pretty intense situation with your dad. It's tough when someone gets really into a belief system like that. The way they have those levels and special words seems like a way to keep them in a bubble. Conversations must be awkward if he's always referencing that stuff. It's hard to connect when someone is so deep into a group like that. Must make family gatherings interesting, though.
Whenever I see a thread like this, I always look for other way believers. It was the smallest church that I was raised in. My parents had been involved in the cult for almost a decade before I was born. There's a very long story that goes along with all this, but it took 3 years after college before I finally called bullshit on the whole organization and left. My parents are amazing, so I lucked out on that.
It's interesting how those experiences shape us. Growing up in a small community can be tough when you question things others accept. It's good you found your path and could step away from it. Not everyone has supportive parents, so that's a plus for you. Those years after college can be a time for self-discovery. It sounds like you've found your own beliefs now.
I feel like I probably missed a party, but my parents have been Scientologists since I was 2, so I was essentially born into it. I'm no longer an active member of the church. My priorities mostly took me elsewhere, and some of the movements coming within the church I found myself in disagreement with. My father is still involved with the church extensively. My mother's involvement mirrors my own in very little at all.
I get that. Growing up in a certain environment can shape you a lot, but it's cool to carve your own path. Not everyone sticks to what they were raised in, and that's fine. It's interesting to see how families deal with differing beliefs, too. Your experience shows how personal priorities can really change things over time.
Like most kids, my parents forced me to go to church. It was the Church of Christ. I was taken twice a week and forced to sit through services. I was threatened as a child and told that if I didn't believe, I would burn in hell forever and ever. I left the church, but continued to fear God. It wasn't until halfway through college, after taking Old and New Testament history, that I began to realize what had happened, how badly I'd been lied to, and that no, I wouldn't go to hell. After that, they had no power over me.
It's rough how some experiences shape your beliefs. Being forced into something can really mess with your head. That realization in college must have been a turning point. Breaking free from those fears can feel like a weight lifted. It's important to find your own path and understanding, especially when it comes to faith. Everyone has their journey, and not all of them are easy.
Wow, my stepmom was at Zendik for 15 years. I never thought I'd hear from anyone else who had been there. She left in the early 2000s, probably after you did, so you might have met her. She has a lot of crazy stories from the Texas days, but she doesn't talk about why she left. I get the sense that something pretty bad happened, and she moved to a non-culty commune in another state. Edit. After reading the blog you posted, I'm pretty amazed. I had no idea it was that weird / extreme. It's strange to read about the stuff she has glossed over in her descriptions of the place. I've been to several different communes / farming communities, and they are all casual and tame in comparison. My stepmom is just a regular farmer now. She's so practical and level-headed. It's hard to imagine the kind of person she might have been at Zendik.
That's an interesting connection. People can change a lot over time. Your stepmom's experiences must have shaped her in ways that seem distant from her current life. It's common for people from intense backgrounds to leave certain aspects behind when they find stability. The contrast between her past and present could be quite a story in itself. It's wild to think about the different paths people take.
I went to school with a gal who had this sort of thing happen to her. She disappeared after 8th grade and then reappeared when we were all 17 or so. I clearly remember her saying that her parents paid for someone to basically kidnap her to take her to a behavior modification school. At the time, I wasn't sure if her story was true, but after reading this, I doubt she could have made it up. I can't believe organizations like this exist in the States.
That's a wild story. It's strange to think about what people go through. If her story is true, it must have been a rough experience. It's really unsettling knowing there are places like that out there, especially in a place like the US. Makes you wonder how many others have been through similar situations. It's a lot to take in, honestly.
This is crazy. The Institute of Basic Life Principles was founded in my town, Hinsdale, Illinois, and I grew up maybe 2 minutes away from the headquarters on Ogden Avenue. They own a gigantic tract of land in our town, and the fun thing to do in high school for bored kids was to go culting, as we called it, which was basically driving around on their property until people in the cult started chasing you.
That sounds wild. I can see why high schoolers would get a kick out of it. Just driving around, trying to get a rise out of the people there. It's like a mix of thrill and just being a teenager, bored and looking for something to do. Those stories usually stick with you too, even if it was just for a laugh. Glad you had that experience. It must have been memorable.
Ah yes, AITA. My family, as well as several others in our church, were fairly involved with it when I was growing up. My parents started using the material to homeschool from late elementary school until some point in high school. I'm pretty sure my dad started having theological issues with it at some point before he stopped actively participating in it. While we did use the material and go to some of the seminars, we were never as involved as many families. I believe that it was the legalistic teachings of ATI that played a large part in me falling away from Christianity in college. Also, Bill Gothard recently stepped down due to allegations of sexual harassment.
It's interesting how experiences shape beliefs. I remember my own encounters with strict teachings when I was younger. They sometimes felt overwhelming, like there was no room for questioning. As I got older, I found it hard to reconcile those rules with my personal views. When I heard about Bill Gothard, it just reinforced how leaders can impact faith communities, for better or worse.
Thank you for your story, and I'm sorry your family can't provide you the support you need, or at least needed in the past. I'm very curious about your current belief system. You say you're still Christian and reevaluated your beliefs. Did you base it on a different branch of Christianity? I grew up Catholic, but am not currently practicing. Still, I haven't found a better version of Christianity that I agree with more for a lot of reasons that I want to pursue, so I still consider myself a Catholic.
It's interesting how beliefs evolve over time. I grew up in a similar environment, with a stronger focus on traditions rather than personal faith. When I stepped back and reflected, I realized I still held on to some values but didn't fully align with the practices. It's a bit of a journey trying to find what truly resonates. Staying connected to those roots can be comforting, even if it's not the same as before.
I hope you won't be offended, but I'm surprised at how many cult-like groups come out of Korea. Maybe it's just a fluke. This cult was at my school. Besides the Unification Church, there is Mom Meditation and Dawn Yoga. And I guess North Korea is kind of one giant cult. Well, now that I write this, I realize it is a fluke because there are thousands of cults in the US. I guess the thing I mean is that Korea exports a few cults to the US.
It's interesting how certain groups can be seen as cult-like, especially when you think about their influence in different countries. I remember a friend mentioning how they stumbled upon a meditation group at school that seemed a bit off. It had that same vibe where it felt more about control than peace. Makes you wonder how some of these beliefs spread and take hold in various places.
Anytime they eased out for a family vacation or for non-church social events, the congregation guilted them, to put it lightly. Traditional society was bad. They shouldn't be spending their time doing worldly things. We need you need us, etc. We had this happen at a previous church. Like if we woke up and weren't assigned to work anything that day, why a church of 75 members needed for greeters, I'll never know. We would get guilt if we didn't attend anyway. You aren't attending the 7 a.m. prayer services before work? Why? You didn't stay until 10 p.m. during the prayer part of the revival? Why not? It never got to full cult levels, but the early red flags were there.
I had a similar experience with a group. It started off feeling welcoming, but eventually, the pressure to always be involved became overwhelming. If you missed a meeting or didn't volunteer enough, people would ask what was wrong. It felt like you couldn't have your own life outside of the group. I realized it wasn't healthy. It wasn't quite a cult, but the signs were definitely there.
I was in the Worldwide Church of God in the late 80s as a toddler. My dad got us involved, and my mom wasn't a Christian at the time. She felt that what was being preached wasn't what she had heard about Christianity from her grandparents. So she read the Bible from cover to cover. Through that, she became a Christian, left my dad in the church, and then my dad came to his senses and my parents got back together. I didn't have Christmas until I was 2, didn't dress up for Halloween either until that time. Crazy place. And my mom says the worship music sucked. My dad still won't eat pork.
It's interesting how things can change over time. Your mom's journey really shows how powerful belief can be. It's funny to think about those early holidays and traditions you missed out on. And your dad's refusal to eat pork is a solid reminder of those old teachings sticking around. That church sounds like a wild ride for sure.
I have a Jehovah's Witness church near to my home, and we regularly receive Watchtower magazines. I've often seen teens and older kids helping deliver. What was it like going through your teens whilst being a Jehovah's Witness, if you don't mind sharing that? I ask as I've always felt a bit sorry for them doing the delivery.
Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness had its challenges. I remember feeling different, especially during school events. Delivering magazines was just part of it, but it wasn't all bad. It taught responsibility and gave me a sense of community. Sometimes I felt odd doing it, but I got used to it. Seeing my friends help out made it easier. We were all in it together, which mattered a lot.
Holy shit, I was in SGI too. It actually did change my life. I think it depends on the chapter and the country. I am from India, and the SGI people here are very friendly. They didn't preach me much on getting other members, but what they told me was to chant with them regularly. I was going through major depression, and I needed something, though my religion is very spiritual, Hindu, but I am not. I chanted for a year, staring at a wall, and just letting my concerns out. I liked the fact they listened to me and said really nice things. I don't think they are bad people. I like that community. Reason I left was because I got too busy with everything else. And the good thing is, they totally accepted it and were really cool with it.
It's interesting how different communities can have a big impact on us. Sounds like the SGI folks were supportive during your tough times. Chanting can be a way to release stress and connect with yourself. It's nice that they didn't push membership and were cool when you moved on. Life gets busy, but it's good to know you had that support when you needed it. Sometimes just having someone listen makes a difference.
That's a perfectly legitimate fear. But remember that if there is a just God, He gave you the power of reason. Doubt naturally comes with that, and that's perfectly okay. Trust yourself, your instincts, and your heart, and you'll be all right. If you thought you were being lied to or lying to yourself, you did the right thing in walking away. Check out /u/Jagannatai's response to why he left the Hare Krishna. I think it sums up my point really well.
I had a friend who left a similar group. He struggled with doubts for a while but eventually trusted his gut. It wasn't easy, but stepping away helped him find clarity. He often mentions how listening to himself made a big difference. It's true that sometimes walking away is necessary, especially when something doesn't feel right. Just because it looks fine on the surface doesn't mean it is.
Upside? I was brought up in that. You don't realize how crazy you are until you're out of it. My experience was a little different though. I would sit back and watch more than participate because I never really bought into it. This made people label me a bad kid, even though I was a great kid. But I guess not dancing and speaking in tongues and running the aisles equals devil worshiper.
It's interesting how perceptions shape our identities. You can be a good person and still not fit into a certain mold. Watching from the sidelines gives you a different perspective. Sometimes, people react negatively to what they don't understand, labeling you unfairly. It's a reminder that just because you don't partake in something, it doesn't define your character. You can still have your own values and be true to yourself.
A friend of mine and her family used to be a part of the Mormon church. Long story short, her older brother came out as gay and the family left the church. The other members were harassing him. My friend's family decided his happiness was more important to them than being accepted by the other members, especially since the only way to be accepted was for him to marry a woman and be miserable his whole life. Her brother is getting married to the man he loves this summer, and her family couldn't be happier. Smiley face.
That's a pretty heartwarming story. It's cool that your friend's family stuck by her brother like that. Choosing family over community acceptance is not easy, but they did the right thing. It's great to hear her brother is getting married to someone he loves. That support really matters. Just goes to show how love can triumph over those expectations.
I know this all too well. I was raised Mormon, but I'm no longer a participating member, too lazy to remove my name from the records. I got tired of the lies and hearing more about Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ. I even went out on a mission to South Korea, and about a year into it, and after being depressed because I was forced to live a religion I didn't believe in due to the social pressure from friends and family to stay and be a good Mormon, I chose to come home early. Ever since, life has been great. Here in a little bit on June 12th, it'll be my 1-year anniversary of being home from my mission and not being a participating member of the LDS Church.
It sounds like you've been through a lot. Growing up in a strong belief system can be tough, especially when it doesn't align with who you really are. It takes courage to step away and find your own path. It's cool to hear that you've found more peace since leaving the church. That milestone next month is definitely worth reflecting on. Here's to continuing to live life on your own terms.
Non-Hare Krishna Hindu here. How strict are most laymen? As far as I know, they have rules such as be vegetarian, no drugs, no onion/garlic, chant 16 rounds every day, only have sex for procreation, and not eat outside food or food that isn't offered to Krishna. But do most Hare Krishnas actually follow these rules strictly? I'm aware that some Hindus also follow some of these rules like being vegetarian and stuff, but do most Hare Krishna laymen strictly follow the other things like no outside food or no non-procreative sex? Many other Indian Hindus I know find these rules to be kind of extreme, and many of us aren't affiliated with ISKCON, so we're not sure whether most Hare Krishnas are actually that strict.
I had a friend who got into Hare Krishna a while back. He was super committed at first, following all the rules like chanting and being strict about food. Over time, though, he loosened up. He still avoids meat but eats out sometimes. Most Hare Krishnas I've seen are pretty chill about the rules, even if they start off strict. It's more about personal choice as people figure things out for themselves.
My GF is Hare Krishna as well. I'm a Lutheran, and I think over 2.5 years I've somewhat come to understand the gist of it. Her family went on multiple trips to India to visit all the sites. And although she isn't very active, she says sometimes she'd be willing to go back and live the way the communities do. She lived in both the FL and PA once. I've seen the Alachua Temple. Very kooky people. The weirdest thing to me, I think, is the renaming thing. But then again, I think that has more to do with the people that originally joined in the time they did hippies in the 60s.
It's interesting how different backgrounds can blend together. I've had friends with unique beliefs too. It reminds me of how people find their own paths and what resonates with them. The renaming aspect sounds pretty unusual. I've seen groups where names hold a lot of significance, almost like a fresh start. It's cool to learn about others' experiences, even if they seem a bit out there. It makes you see the world from different angles.
Can you elaborate on the internal chaos after the failed prophecy? I used to always see family radio people set up in the NYC subway at 42nd Street, not far from the Port Authority entrance with their end-of-the-world signs. When the world didn't end, they suddenly stopped showing up to set up their tables. I always wondered how those people took it emotionally.
I remember seeing those folks too. They seemed so sure about their message. When nothing happened, I guess the silence was telling. It's tough to have your beliefs challenged like that. I imagine they felt lost or embarrassed. Some probably just moved on, while others might still hold on to the hope that they were right. It's interesting how a failed prophecy can shake someone's entire worldview.
I was never an addict, but my father was. He drank all the time growing up. Literally never saw him drink a non-alcoholic beverage. He started going to AA around the time I was 12. It consumed our entire family. My parents went to meeting every night. My siblings and I were forced to go, at least once a week. The only friends they had were other people in AA. It was the most important thing to my parents. They missed our school events and even stopped us from participating in certain extracurricular things that would stop us from going to family meetings. With my parents' level of commitment, you would assume my dad stopped drinking, but he never did for more than a week. Finally, he got arrested for a car accident when he was drunk and was forced into rehab. The therapist told my family that AA can help some people, but it is never a long-term solution simply because it has an ingrained aspect of failing and asking for forgiveness, which is all AA meetings are. It can help some people, but it is very much like a cult.
That sounds tough. Growing up in that environment must have been really challenging. Having your family revolve around something like AA, especially when it didn't work for your dad, can leave a mark. It's a lot to cope with when you're still trying to figure out your own life. It's interesting how some methods help some people, but not everyone fits into those boxes.
I left AA for the same reasons you did. It felt like I was an AA addict, and I couldn't do anything without the consent of the elders. Then a friend suggested that I take the good and leave the bad of the program. I took a few life lessons like gratitude is the secret of happiness, and acceptance is the answer to all my problems, and left all the shame in those god-awful meetings. AA on the whole improved my life, but only after I left AA.
It's interesting how stepping away can lead to personal growth. That friend sounds like a good influence. Picking out the useful lessons while ditching the negativity really makes sense. Sometimes, you just need to find your own way, even if it means leaving something behind that was supposed to help. It's all about what works for you in the end. Glad to hear you found some value in it.
I love this comment. I felt the same way when I did inpatient, and still do. I had to attend outpatient groups, and man, the glares I got for saying AA was like a cult were awful. I demanded a different program from everyone else while inpatient, and the therapist begrudgingly ordered me the SMART recovery workbook. It helped me reprioritize my life, discover the root of my depression that was causing me to drink, and it keeps me in check from getting to that point again.
It's interesting to hear how different recovery programs resonate with people. I've seen friends go through similar struggles. One of them found a different approach that clicked, and it made a huge difference. They were tired of the typical methods and ended up trying something new that worked for them. It's all about finding what helps you the most, I guess. Everyone needs their own path.
I really don't think many members are hatching sinister plans. Most think they're helping the people who join their group. This guy was clearly helped as he's now clean/sober. There are some aspects of religion that are profoundly beautiful and that I miss, like selfless, anonymous service to your fellow man, etc.
It's interesting how people can find connection and support in groups. This guy turned his life around and found sobriety, which is a big deal. It shows that not all intentions are bad. Sometimes the community aspect really does help. I get the appeal of the selfless service too. It's a missed aspect in a lot of places these days.
My sister recently left Teen Challenge and is still sober 3 months out, living in her own apartment. When I visited her, we went to the laundromat to wash her clothes. The organization was incapable of maintaining a working washing machine for the women there. And she whispered to me that the program was a cult and strange things were happening that she couldn't tell me about, but that it was basically a slave labor program, and the head guy had men from the program guarding his complex like foot soldiers 24/7. I have since left the country for unrelated reasons, and don't know the whole story, but I really want to talk to her now that she's out and find out what was going on.
It's good to hear your sister is doing well and staying sober. Sounds like she had a tough experience at Teen Challenge. A program that's meant to help should never feel like that. It's understandable you're curious about her time there. When you get a chance to talk, maybe she'll share more. Just be there for her. Sometimes just listening can make a big difference.
Super Tiny Toxic Church called me because I wasn't at Wednesday Bible study. Couldn't accept my answer. I was with my highly socially anxious friend whose husband was deployed. She needed me. Kept insisting I should just bring her with me. No. I swear it was weirder than it sounds on paper. When we decided to leave, we didn't go to church and planned to write a letter or make a call that afternoon. Didn't get the chance. The pastor and family showed up at our door immediately after church, yelling at us that we lied to God and to the church, that things would go wrong in our life until we righted this sinfulness. Funny, everything started to get better after that, and we were out of the state in less than a month.
That sounds intense. It's wild how some groups can be so pushy. You were just trying to be there for a friend in need. Shows how little they understand real support. Instead of giving you peace, they added pressure. It's ironic that things improved for you after that too. Sometimes stepping away from toxic environments makes room for better opportunities. It's all about prioritizing what's important in life.
I love going in field service, but I was very isolated and desperately wanted attention. I wasn't allowed to hang out with kids who weren't witnesses very often, and there was only one other teenager in the Kingdom Hall I attended. So, I love going to meetings because there were people to talk to. There were other negative effects if you're interested in hearing about those.
It's interesting how being in a group can make you feel less lonely, even if you don't have much in common with everyone. I remember a time when I also felt isolated in a similar environment. Connecting with others, even for a short while, can really help. Sometimes it feels like you just want to share experiences but feel stuck in a bubble. It's a tough situation to navigate.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.